of that Last Supper when Christ set up the communion, as we'll be sharing with you next week. Took him 3 years. Big project, great detail, a lot of work went into it. If you look at the painting, he grouped the disciples in three. There were three, Jesus in the middle, 3 and 3 in the way he laid it out. And it was very elaborate in all that he did. In the painting, the arms of Christ are extended, and he's holding a cup that would be passed to those disciples for them to drink from the wine of that Last Supper. And a beautiful cup was in the Lord's hands. Legend has it that when he finished that huge painting, he asked a friend to give his honest opinion about the work. The friend came in and looked at it and said, "It's absolutely wonderful. The cup is so real, I can't take my eyes off of it." And Leonardo took a paintbrush, dipped it into paint, and smeared right over that cup immediately. He said the purpose of the painting is not to illustrate the cup. The purpose of the painting is to draw attention to Christ. And if I put so much detail in the cup that it takes your eyes off Christ, the cup is wrong. And he repainted it and made it a more simple, a more plain looking cup because he wanted the attention to go to Christ. Our purpose as Christians, not just our vocation or how we survive and make a living to make it through this world, but part of our purpose is that our lives would glorify and honor Jesus Christ. He is the one who loved us enough to come and take on a body of flesh and live like a man in this world and die a very painful, a very cruel death to redeem us from sin and to help us have a new purpose in life. When he was willing to do that much for us, then we ought to be willing to do whatever we need to do to honor him and to magnify him. 4 primary thoughts that I'd like to leave with you this morning. First of all, we magnify Christ by how we live. As we read this letter to the church at Philippi, Paul is in prison. He's not really where he wants to be, but he was forced to appeal to Caesar because the courts were wrongly going to commit him for a crime that he had not really done. And he knew that there were folks who were out to kill him, and so the appeal to the emperor was the only way to save his life. The emperor at that time was Nero. You probably read a little about Nero when you were in high school and maybe if you went to college. He was not a Christian. He was probably the most brutal leader of any civilized country in the world. An awful man. I was listening to Dr. Robert Jeffress from First Baptist Dallas on TV this morning, and he referred to Nero. And he's talking about, you may like how the election went, you may not like how the election went, but God's still in control. And God can use people whether we like them or don't like them. He even used Nero. And Dr. Jeffress used an illustration I had forgotten. I've heard it, but I had forgotten it. Nero was such an evil man. He would take Christians, pour melted wax over them, and set them on fire to be a light like a candle in his garden at night, and burn them up and destroy them. He would entertain his friends. This was the story that I remembered and had in my illustration this morning. He would take you, if you were a Christian, and put you in an arena and smear blood on you and turn wild animals loose to entertain his friends. You didn't want to publicly announce that you were a Christian if you were around Nero, because you would be used for sport and it would end up costing you your life. And Paul had appealed for justice to Nero. Okay, Lord, that don't make sense to me. I mean, this man would kill Christians. Why would Paul appeal to him? Well, it's a case of putting off death a few more days if I go to Rome for trial or be killed here locally, and he took the appeal process. Persecution was widespread at that time of believers in Jesus Christ, and the emperor had no qualms about killing folks in any way he could come up with. My thought is, magnify Christ in how you live, and under number one, no matter where. Paul was in prison, and his goal was that while I'm in prison, I want to live my life in a way that demonstrates Christ is my Lord and Master. Most of us are not in prison, not in one with bars on it. We may be in a prison of our own creation where we have done some things in our life and we can't get past where we are. It's kind of imprisoned us in some failures and mistakes we've made. What are we doing to magnify Christ where we are? How are we living to demonstrate that Christ has made us different? Well, if I was in this place, or if I had this kind of blessing in my life, I would be living for Christ. Do you understand God knows where you are? He knows what's going on in your life. And if God has chosen not to move you from where you are, that means He wants to use you where you are. He's not saying you go to some other place and then I can use you. He will use you where you are now. And Paul was in prison, and he didn't want to stay there. He wanted to be out. But meantime, I'm here. And I need to be using my life for the Lord right now. No matter where we are in life, we need to figure out, what can I do now? How can I serve Christ in my present circumstance? Paul made the best of a difficult situation, and I think you and I need to as well. Be under number one, Paul says, not ashamed. In verse 20, he says he does not want to be ashamed about anything. Even if the Romans came to put him in an arena where he would be killed, or if they took his life in some other way, and about 3 or 4 years later, Nero did have his head cut off, so he was killed. But he wanted his life to represent Christ well wherever he was. Even in prison, he wanted to be above reproach. You and I are called to live holy lives. We're called to live for God and demonstrate that God has made a difference in our lives. Now, I use the phrase once in a while, half joking but not really joking about it, about being odd for God. I don't want to act like everybody else in the world. Amen. The rest of the world may not be trying to live for God. I'm not really responsible for how they live, but I'm responsible for how I live. Am I doing things in my life that I'm ashamed of? Do I need to repent? I need to change my ways. That can be language. It can be attitudes. It can be prejudices. It can be all kinds of behavior and actions in our life. But Paul says, I don't want to be ashamed. I want to live my life in a way that God is pleased with me. That was Paul's thinking. Repent and get over it and move on with my life. All of us do. God said, be holy, for I am holy. We are not free to do anything and everything we want to do in life. If you are a child of God, you're responsible to God for how you live and what you do and how you conduct yourself in the community, how you relate to other people. Our lives need to be pleasing to God, so we need to be careful in how we live. Magnify Christ as you walk with Him. Let your life be an example to others. Now, I try to tell people, don't follow me as an example. Follow Jesus as an example. But the truth is, there are people that look to you. your children, your grandchildren, your neighbor, a coworker. There are people who look at you because they know you call yourself a Christian. I went in the lumber yard there where I used to work Friday to pick up some building materials, and two men came up to me. I'm no longer there. I've been gone right at a year now, and I went in, and two of them